So I saw something the other day on a web forum that reminded me of this. This is a class that I presented in 2004 at the first CAN conference in Chicago about streamlining the diagnostic process. In that class, I had used this chart that I had sketched together, and it was not meant to be a standalone chart. It was meant to go along with other stuff that explains some caveats and whatnot. But I saw this, and I'm wondering, what's that doing there? I wrote that, and I see no credit. And it's reminding me of this, and so I'm thinking about it tonight, and I thought, well, let's look at something from that presentation. I had a 2003 Sierra with low power, and the next step in the slides that were flowing was this here. I had a link. If I clicked on this image, it would launch an application that would be a viewer of scan data, and I had my notes here to open up that folder and pick these files. And yes, I know, don't put your notes on the screen. So from there, I went through some live data, and then what I did is I went through some static stuff, explaining this is what we got here, this is what we got there. And then I had a summary, which was total trim at idle was 0, total trim about 3,000 RPM in my service bay was about 21%, and light cruise down the road, trim is 28%. And so from there, I had something to say. I don't remember what it was, but what I want to do is open this file, or one of the files where I got these numbers from, using an updated version of that software. So here it is. And so first thing I want to do is explain two things here, which explains why I wrote this. I spent a lot of time on this. Mm-hmm. So when you use GM software to view a data capture on your PC, it limits you to 90 frames. So a frame is 200 milliseconds long. So it limits you to 18 seconds. And I need more time than that. I want to see the whole thing. I want to see the big picture. I want to see the forest before I look at the trees. And so I've added some stuff here. When you click the button on the software to open a file, it takes a data file from the scan tool and it adds PIDs and it does different things. So for instance, you are familiar with long-term trim and short-term trim. Here we have bank 1 trim, meaning the total trim on bank 1, long-term plus short-term. And I have the same thing for bank 2. And so now I can click through the data and see the total trim on each bank in one PID. Sometimes I want something a little bit more, and what I'll do is I will look at the total trim. This is another PID I created, which means this is the total trim for both banks together. So it's the overall total trim for the condition. I find that useful. Another thing I added, not for diagnosis, but for teaching purposes, and you'll see in a little bit, is volumetric efficiency. Some later model GMs have a VE PID. This one is, you can think of this as me going through the whole 800 frames here, one frame at a time, using a VE calculator, getting the numbers, and plopping it in there. By simply opening the file, I get this. And so from that, let's go to the complaint. So let me change the PIDs around here. So right here, my wide open throttle, let me put up some O2 sensors. Now, lack of power, I want to know, is it running out of fuel? Seems like a good place to start. So wide open throttle, you can see the O2 sensors upstream are in the toilet, meaning they're lean. If you don't believe those guys, you can look at the downstream sensors. And you can see they are also reporting that we are very, very lean. So it's lean either because we're not able to deliver the fuel we want, or we are underestimating the airflow and therefore underestimating the amount of fuel to deliver. Meaning I'm looking at the mass airflow sensor. So let's do that by looking at load. Now, engine load here, by GM is defined by one of 4 ways back then. And notice here that when I stomp on the throttle, the blade opens, my load ramps up. It's not just going bang like they usually do, it's ramping. And that's because this is normal for this truck, because that's the way they calculated load for this truck. And so I'm looking at that, and I'm looking for peak load, and it's 77. And I know that peak load of 77 is too low. It's underestimating airflow. Now, another hint that's being given to me as I'm driving this thing is the engine is pinging. The engine is pinging. Yes, it's lean, but the engine is pinging not because it's lean. The engine is pinging because mass airflow is underestimating the airflow, and therefore we have advanced ignition timing. So there's our pinging. So I already know here what the problem is. I'm going to be putting a mass airflow sensor on this. Now let's suppose that you wanted to see VE, because that's what you do. I want to point out something here. VE, let me bring up the throttle blade. We lost that. All right. So the minute we stab the throttle, VE it's up there, right? And so if you're going to use VE, I got a question for you. Where are you going to put your cursor? Where are you going to get your data from? Because notice here that when I first stab the throttle, that VE goes as low as 59 and as high as 73. So I got a pretty big spread, 59 to 73 for a VE. Which number do I use? Okay, so some people will say grab VE at 5,000 RPM, and I'm okay with that. Here we see VE is 68% at 5,000 RPM. Now that's low. And my point here is I knew it was low. Why wouldn't it be? Because I saw the load where it doesn't belong. If you're going to use VE, you have to memorize numbers. So if you ask somebody who's teaching VE what's a good number, they'll give you a range, and then you have to ask yourself, okay, here's the range. What if it's a few percentage numbers off out of my range, or what if it's in different parts of that range? Is that important? Yes, it is. You need to know. So you need to memorize stuff. So my thought here is, if I'm going to memorize stuff, I might as well memorize OE scan data, because I don't have to do any interpreting. I don't have to get a calculator and whatnot. So notice here how VE is changing by quite a bit. So if you're going to use VE, if you've decided this is what I want to do in life, make sure you get your numbers at the same place all the time. I'm going to recommend you get it right around 5,000 RPM, but you pick a spot, because you can see the numbers change. Now I have some much more dramatic examples somewhere. VE is not the same across every part of the airflow range. That makes sense, right? We know that the engine airflows differently at different loads, right? So with that, you're probably wondering what my sales pitch is. Where do you go to buy the software? And so there is no sales pitch. I don't sell the software. This is something I built for me. It ain't worth making it a commercial product. I might as well get on YouTube and talk about my toothpick collection. So, because there's more money in that. So anyway, just I'm double my limit. I was going to try to limit this to 5 minutes, and I'm very close to 10. See you later.